Good morning, everyone. So wonderful to see everybody. Welcome. I'm Dr. Jessica Bonduras, Associate Superintendent of the Professional Learning and Support Division at the Santa Clara County Office of Education. I'd like to start by thanking you all for joining us today for the California Collaborative for Learning Acceleration Summit. Today is a dedicated space and time to gain knowledge and deepen your understanding of learning acceleration for the improvement of student outcomes. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly share the agenda for our morning together. We have a day full of learning on topics such as learning acceleration, student engagement, and also hearing from our teachers and their own meaningful moments. To welcome us to the summit and set the tone for our learning is our County Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Mary Ann Dewan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Bonduras, for the warm introduction. And I especially want to thank everyone for joining us today here on a Saturday. This is our second annual California Collaborative for Learning Acceleration Summit. I am Dr. Mary Ann Dewan, the Santa Clara County Superintendent of Schools, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you and all of our distinguished speakers here today to the 2024 Summit. The CCLA grant was established to build bridges with current grade level content rather than filling in the holes. Accelerated learning strategies are designed to meet pupils where they are in their learning while using evidence-based approaches that enable students to make strong, rapid progress in their mastery of knowledge and skills. These strategies may include individual or small group tutoring, or whole class instruction using research-informed methods. They involve scaffolds and differentiation to meet pupils' learning needs. Our CCLA work is done in partnership. There are a number of important partners, and I want to elevate several here today. First, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, or CCEE. We are grateful to them for the partnership. And our colleagues and a number of county offices of education across the state, including Contra Costa, Imperial, Los Angeles, Placer, Riverside, and Tulare counties. Here locally, the Connie L. Lurie College of Education at San Jose State University and the Center to Support Excellence in Teaching at Stanford University. I also want to commend and express gratitude to Barb Flores, our Director of Learning Acceleration, and her team for their work in making today possible. I'd like to acknowledge our partnership with our Santa Clara County Board of Education, including our President, Maimona Afzal-Burda, Vice President Don Rocha, and trustees Chan, DeSalvo, Laurie, Ma, and Sri Krishnan. CCLA has the goal of leveraging knowledge about learning acceleration across the state to best support any and all educators. The grant project strives to create an inclusive space where educators can utilize tools in Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, social emotional learning, SEL, and culturally sustaining pedagogy, CSP. Over the course of today, you'll have the opportunity to hear and learn from wonderful experts. Dr. Nikki Newton, an expert in elementary mathematics, curriculum, and curriculum mapping. Ada Allen, a full-time professional learning consultant for Corwin and a teaching clinician. Additionally, there will be an educator panel and the opportunity to hear from students. Today's time together will allow you to create accelerated learning opportunities that are engaging, culturally relevant, and personalized to build student agency, and to design transformative experience that value and elevate moments with students, truly making moments that matter. Now at this time, it is my distinguished pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Ken Shelton. Ken is the International Society for Technology and Education 2022 Making It Happen Award winner. He's committed to improving digital learning opportunities for students and has been named by EdTech Magazine as an influencer to follow. Currently, Ken serves on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Board for several tech companies as well as nonprofits. His board services include advice, platform analysis, policy analysis, and outreach, in addition to the development of both equitable and inclusive internal recruitment and retention programs. His academic background is complemented by over 2 decades of hands-on teaching experience, with a significant part of his career devoted to shaping young minds at the middle school level through the lens of technology. Today, he is joining us to discuss empowering success, designing for accelerated learning in dynamic, tech-driven learning environments. Please, everyone, join me in giving a warm welcome to Ken Shelton. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Dewan. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So good morning, everybody. Let's do a quick check-in. How y'all feeling this morning? And just put it in the chat. I saw where many of you were excited that we're able to spend this time together. You can just drop in like a thumbs up or a smiley face. Yay, perfect, perfect, perfect. So I'm glad that we were all able to spend this time together. Obviously, many of us would have preferred it to be in person, but you know, we're good. We can we're gonna have some good time together. All right. Now, can you all confirm in the chat that you can see the slide, please? Yes, perfect. All right, so this is interactive. So there are gonna be times where I'll ask you all to go to a platform, which I have a slide for that, or use the chat. And so, you know, the whole idea around us being here together is definitely, you know, it's looking at obviously learning acceleration, but this keynote is going to augment that in several capacities. And so, you know, the thing I like about this is that we are trying to put students first, but my perspective is always we also have to take care of ourselves first. It is unrealistic to expect any educator to be at their best for the students, or for whether you work directly with students or not, if you are not taking care of yourself. So in other words, my whole thing is, it is not possible to pour from an empty cup. So I want to take you all through just a couple of quick affirmations around rest, recoup, rejuvenate, recharge, and resist for you all, because I do think one of the questions I like to ask all the time, and Dr. Dewan just brought it up in the intro, is the importance of our social and emotional learning, or what I always say is social well-being. But one of the questions I always ask of districts that I've had the privilege of working with is point me to a definitive component of your comprehensive SEL program that specifically supports the well-being of the adults. And unfortunately, I have yet to see that. So for me, it's like, I'm all for an SEL approach, but if it's going to be comprehensive, then we have to make sure that we take care of each other as well. It's not at the expense of the kids. It's adjacent to what we do with the kids. So I'm going to give you all a few things, and I have a question for you all in this context, and that is the following. So these are questions that I would encourage you all to start to normalize, that you ask of yourself and you ask of your colleagues or those that you work closely with. So the first one is this, is how am I giving myself time, space, and grace to rest, to care for my mind and my body? And so that's the first question. Are you giving yourself the time, space, and grace to rest? Burning the candle at both ends, as we all know, if we literally lit a candle at both ends, it's not only is it going to burn out much faster, but there'll be nothing left. The next one to share with you all is, that's for you individually. The next one to share with you all is more of a collective approach, which I'm a big believer in, community approach to wellness and even to learning, which you'll see elements of that coming up shortly. But the next one is, how might I incorporate a normalized culture of individual and collective healing and restoration within my community? So that would be your team, your division, your office, your school, your district. And then if you notice, there's a note. This may include disconnecting, reconnecting, and then dedicating time and space. And that dedicating time and space goes back to this one. And then the last one to share with you all is what are the definitive ways in which you can increase your awareness of your own exhaustion, overworking, and grind culture, and not just yourself, but also those that you work with. And if you'll notice, here's the note, because how often do these words come up in education? An overworked and exhausted mind is counter to a mind that is freed for creativity, imagination, and innovation. I can't be creative or innovative or use my imagination to meet the needs of learners, my colleagues, or myself if I'm overworked and exhausted. It is not cognitively possible. And so this is my whole idea around, we have to really start to recognize, again, our own exhaustion, and when it's time to say, I need to give myself the grace to rest, and then I will re-engage in whatever the endeavor is that I'm doing, whether it's my thinking or my actions. So that leads me to a question that I'll just ask you all to drop in the chat real quick, and that is the following. What's bringing you joy at this time? What's bringing you joy at this time? I'll put the question in the chat too. Sun, the beautiful weather. How to say we're in California without saying we're in California. Connecting as colleagues, walking, family. Sun has come up quite a few times. Walks in the evening with my wife, new puppy, complete surrounding. I love it. Family, I see families come up quite a bit as well. Sun and family are so far the top two answers, being outside. Like I said, how to say we're in California without saying we're in California. Beautiful weather. Yay, good. All of these things are great, and I hope that you all are using those as, again, your opportunity for giving yourself the time, grace, and space to rest, to care for your mind and your body. I love it. Protecting my peace and rejecting negative energy. Good. I have a whole thing I could share with you all on establishing what I call it is what real self-care looks like. And y'all would like it. It definitely involves things like setting definitive professional boundaries, among other things. Perfect. Well, thank you all. I appreciate y'all doing that. So again, this is something, my encouragement to all of you is, what might that question look like in the context of any time you have any professional gatherings, again, whether it be with your team or your division? And if you'll notice, I use the word gatherings intentionally, because when I do a lot of my organizational leadership work, I just watch the audience when I say, how do you all feel about a meeting? And you get you all can probably predict what type of reaction I get. I said, right, but how do we feel if we say we're going to get together for a gathering? Sometimes the terminology can make the difference in the mental and the emotional disposition of the folks that you're looking to get together. So thank you all. Again, keep those in mind as we go forward, not just now, but carry those with you for the remainder of this school year. And hopefully you all will be able to normalize those in the context of your day-to-day work. So I want to shift now to the next thing, and that is the following. I have probably looked at, for sure, at this point in my educator career, I probably looked at more than 100 different strategic plans. And one of the things that I've noticed, there are consistent through lines across almost all of them, and they involve the following. And this is what I call the 5 pillars of achievement. And they are the following. These are either specific or adjacent elements that I've seen in almost every single strategic plan. And they are academic excellence, so the focus on academics, joy and wellness in varying degrees, engagement, collaboration, operational effectiveness, and investing in staff. And I'm going to connect that to the whole purpose of this keynote and the reason why we're here together, because I break those down into the following categories. And I break them down into this. So if we look at all of those things, what does that look like operationalized? What does it look like understanding and applying practices for inclusive environments? What does it look like promoting equity and social justice, fostering innovation and creativity, strengthening family and community partnerships, supporting the navigation of learning systems, and then also supporting behavioral and social and emotional learning? The thing is all of those are interwoven. And I'm going to take you all through how do we be mindful of, design for, and be responsive to each and every one of those things. And it starts off with a question that I'm going to ask you all, and then this is where I'm going to ask you to open a tab to provide your response. Don't do it in the chat. You're going to get a link in just a moment, which Myra, I know Myra has it as well. So when it comes to learning, what experience do you want students to have? So the link was dropped in the chat, and the question is also on there. If you go there and put in that code, it will you'll get an opportunity to fill it in, and then I'll pull it up on the screen if I can. So when it comes to learning, what experience do you want learners to have? And these are great. In fact, let me go to present here, do it larger screen. There we go. Kristen shared in the chat, love that joy is at the center. Usually fun is number one. So I would say in this context, joy and fun can be synonymous, but yes, I'm in full agreement. And I notice engaged is in there as well. I have a slide later of which we'll kind of look at that a little bit more deeply as well. All right, so thank you all. So I think that might be everybody. So there's going to be more, but it's all good. And then Myra, on a side note, maybe I can get a screenshot of this to you so that you can send it to everybody. But if you all notice, there's a couple of things about your responses here. My first provocation is, and I'll drop it in the chat, how many of these? So I dropped in the chat a couple of things to consider. First of all, how many of these can be measured numerically? And then second to that, which is the most valuable for learners? And then which is the most valuable for learning? And if you all notice in the middle there, we've got joy, engaged, meaningful, positive. Even next to that, you have memorable, curiosity, belonging, relevant. All of those are what I would say is all of those are threads to the same quilt. If my learning is relevant, there's a higher likelihood that obviously I'm going to be engaged. Do I feel a sense of belonging in a learning environment, which means that it is a positive and learning environment that sparks my curiosity, is meaningful to me, and thus by way of me connecting all those dots, it brings me joy. And one of the things that I always share with adults is the whole idea around when it comes to our work, my philosophy has always been, if it's not aligned with my purpose and doesn't bring me joy, I'm letting it go. And I think in terms of that, we want to be mindful of that when it comes to our learners, because ultimately, as you all have here, the whole idea is what experience we want. We want it to be joyful. Like that's the whole point of why we're here and what we want. We want learning to be joyful. And the reason why I share that is because our learning environments tend to be more of a binary. They tend to be one of two things. They tend to be environments where students can thrive. What you all just put there in that word cloud, I would associate a majority of what you all shared there as a thriving environment. It's meaningful, it's relevant, I'm engaged, it's fun, I'm experiencing joy, I'm curious. Those are environments where learners thrive. However, when the environments are not conducive for thriving, they are conducive for survival. I'll even ask you all to drop in the chat. You can just put a thumbs up or a me. How many times, if you reflect on your learning experience, did you experience all those things that we put on there versus you were in an environment that was that prioritized conformity, compliance, and in order to reinforce those, you were coerced into doing that, meaning everything was structured for you. And if you didn't fit within that structure, it was usually met with either a punitive response or you were invisible. And I'll prove it. Reflect back upon your learning experience, and is your first memory a joyful one, or is it one of which you had to survive the environment? And that's precisely why I always share that whole idea is we want to focus on trying to make sure that our environments are for thriving, not for surviving. And I'll share with you all that when you're in survival mode, your brain is going to prioritize your survival, not your thrival. And it becomes a cognitive battle, if you will, between my survival and my learning, as opposed to an environment where I can thrive. Now learning is at the center of it. And part of that is understanding, again, that whole experience, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but it's the whole experiences that you all shared there. Is I would even ask the question, what can we do to ensure that our learning environments are environments of joy, belonging? Like, again, I'll get a screenshot of that to you all to do that. So the other thing is to recognize here is when it comes to thrival and survival is the following. Is if we look at our learners as empty vessels that we have to pour into, that runs the risk of another thing, and that is survival and a very dangerous learning dynamic of what I call codependency. If you all think about it, if I'm under the belief that you are empty and you need me in order to fill learning into you, I now have created a codependency dynamic. Your success is predicated on what I give to you, but then here's the danger part for an educator. If I'm not seeing the results of what I'm giving to you, then I start to internalize feelings of inadequacy, inefficiency that can lead to things like displeasure of the job, demoralization, all those things. We have to look at, instead of looking at students as these empty vessels that we need to fill, we need to look at our learners as they are salient human beings capable of their own agency, and our goal is to support them in realizing their full potential. And that leads to the whole idea around this talk, and that is, how do we empower success in our learners? I'm of the belief, and I would love to be proven otherwise, even though I know I won't, is that it is not possible to have an equitable and empowering learning environment that is absent of technology. It's not possible. And I've seen, and I've had conversation with folks like, well, I can do it without the tech. And even like one of you put in the chat, I'm like, okay, then tell me how, if every learner has a voice, then how are you ensuring every voice is heard? How do you account for the introvert in the room? How do you account for the learner who is acquiring English in the room? How do you account for all these things that tech can provide a meaningful and responsive conduit for that? So before I go more deeply into that, I want to share with you all a couple of things, because there are a couple of words that have come up already and they're going to come up again. And I'm a big believer that, if you've been in education long enough, what I always say is, if we've been in education long enough, we've been inundated with a word salad of jazzy jargon. There's all these words, and they're just, if the words are used with no context and no definition, then they run the risk of just becoming mindless platitudes. And so I'm going to share with you all two. So one, whenever I use the word innovation or innovative thinking in the context of this is how I define it: as a creative thought process used to generate new ideas and solutions to problems or challenges that is divergent from traditional or existing thought patterns and practices. Then operationalizing those ideas into tangible action, which yields a definitive and different result or experience. Okay, that's how I define innovation and innovative thinking. I'll give you all an example of something that we all have, most likely, that was innovative. And hopefully, yeah, my iPhone right here, that was considered innovative. It wasn't the first iPhone. I'll age myself a little bit. One of my early iPhones was a Nokia 3150. And for those of you that even remember Nokia, that means that we're in that same age demographic. And I even had a Motorola Flip. But the whole idea around this definition of innovation is that the iPhone was innovative because it provided a different result or experience. And that's how I want us to approach our learning environment, especially from a design perspective. So that's innovation. Accelerated learning. This is how I define accelerated learning: a learning process in which true collaboration exists between the learner and the educator. This learning process takes place in an environment of which real-life connections and active participation are essential. These interactions and connections foster an environment in which applicable understanding of the content takes place at a more rapid pace. Okay, and you notice I didn't say faster, more rapid pace. Again, if we're meeting learners where they're at, we're doing these things. We're making real-life connection. It is active participation in their learning. They're not being, one of you even put in the chat, is I said, what's the difference between learning and being schooled? Okay, to me, being schooled means that I am not an active participant. And then now that go back to thrival and survival. I do want to add a special note that accelerated learning is not remediation. It doesn't involve, I've gone through the content and you didn't get something, so now I have to go and reteach all the content. So I'm going to ask you all to share in the chat when it comes to, especially when it comes to innovation in this context. There is a common phrase that is used in education, and all of us have heard it. Some of us, I used to early in my career, some of us have used it, that is the opposite of innovation and innovative thinking. And you will want to guess what that phrase may be, or what that statement may be. Just drop your ideas in the chat. I've got filling in the holes. Students being busy, fidelity. Audra, I'm going to give you a remote high five. Boom. I knew somebody would get it because that's how often this is used. And my whole thing around this is, one, I've literally heard folks say that they believe in a growth mindset, but then when I ask them about some of their patterns of practice, they're like, well, but that's the way we've always done that. And I'm like, or done this. And I'm like, okay, make it make sense, because you believe in innovation, but then when it comes to looking at your patterns of practice and your normalized behavior or cultural norms, your response is, but this is the way you've always done that. Those don't make sense. And if you'll notice, that doesn't fit innovative thinking. Continuing to do things the way we've always done them runs the risk of intentional or of unintended consequences of many unintended consequences and many other things. By the way, that's in line with a cognitive bias called the bandwagon effect. And as you all can see, that it's defined as when our desires for harmony and conformity sway our decision making. And so I encourage you all, when someone says, well, this is the way we've always done this, okay, what information, both quantitative and qualitative, do we have that supports continuing to do it this way? If we continue to do it this way, are there any unintended consequences of doing it in that capacity? And this is precisely why I get into the whole idea around, we really got to start rethinking a lot of stuff. And that rethinking is the catalyst for what you saw with innovation. We got to rethink a lot of the things that we're doing. because doing things the way we've always done them, clearly when it comes to education, it's something that I bring up all the time, and that is, if we continue to do things the way we've always done them, then that leads me to the following question. Why is the outcomes of many of our children, our historically excluded and marginalized children, those that have been invisible, those that have been under-resourced, those that have been overlooked, those that have been, again, remain on or pushed to the margins, why are their outcomes in education predictable? And my whole thing is, if it's predictable, then that means it's also preventable. So we have to start rethinking. And what is rethinking? Rethinking isn't a remix. It's not taking things that we've always done and then just moving those same pieces around. Okay, that's a remix. It's also not disruption, because disruption is temporary. I've seen innovative ideas where it's like, we had an innovative idea and they do something and it serves more as a disruption because it's a minor change. But remember, it has to yield a definitively different result and or experience. Okay, not just an augmented experience. Sometimes that rethinking requires us to dismantle some of the things that we think, and in some cases, some of our policies and practices, especially those that are antiquated. Then when you dismantle it, you can then reimagine what it might look like. Let's take it all apart, and let's now imagine what might it look like if we were to put the pieces, get new pieces, purge some pieces, and then reassemble what it might look like. When you do that, that goes in the process of the redesign, which means that now we're going to redesign it. And I would encourage you all, if we were to do a redesign, how might that redesign be aligned with all of those responses you all shared in regards to the student experience? And then that would lead to a transformation. And that's the only way to get to transformation. You have to tear it all down and then reimagine, redesign. And then now, thus, by doing that, we transform it. And I think in terms of the experiences that you all just shared on that word cloud and why we're here together and what we're looking at doing around learning acceleration, meeting students where they're at, transforming learning environments, supporting true learner agency. It reminds me of this quote from one of my personal heroes, James Baldwin. The paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated. And I say that because I see it all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. Learners, they either aren't experiencing joy, and let's be realistic, I don't know that we can have joy all the time in everything, but if that's the basis how we start, we increase the likelihood that it will happen with a higher degree of frequency that empowers learners. But the whole idea around, again, if you start to think about, use yourself as an example. At what point did you become conscious of how you were being educated? And how did you feel about it, especially in classes or coursework or environments where you were not supported in making direct connections to what you were learning and your lived experience or the goals or the dreams that you have for your future? Or for me, my thing was always around, which I'm known to do it, was always around, I would constantly trouble the narrative in class. If the class is focused on conforming and compliance, then I've got questions. And my favorite question to ask with some of my teachers was around things like, if they had a rule, no talking in class, and then now they want us to do a class discussion. I'm like, well, wait a minute, how can we have a class discussion if rule number 1 says no talking in class? You know, what am I learning here? What is the purpose behind what I'm learning? And you'll see an example of that coming up later. And so what I always share is that the whole idea around learner agency, it involves this path. So when students are present, that means that they're physically there, but we don't know if they are cognitively, emotionally, or spiritually present. This is where I define mindfulness. Mindfulness, to me, I define it as being spiritually, emotionally, and cognitively present in the moment. So think about students in learning environments that are present. We see them physically there, but are they emotionally, spiritually, and cognitively there? That's why presence has to lead to engagement. What are the ways in which we can walk that path from just being present to be engaged? And then once we do that, going to what you all shared, what are the ways in which learners can now become invested in their learning? That goes to the whole idea around connections, being seen and heard in the learning environments, doing things that that are of a high value that students can see, okay, I can connect what I'm learning to my lived experience and why it's important for me. And once they are able to make that specific connection, then we get into true learner agency, which means they now take ownership over their learning. They start to ask the right questions. They start to identify the resources that they need to realize their full potential and their goals. They start to realize the areas of growth that are important for them in the context of that learning environment. And that leads me to this slide to share with you all, because these are questions that I think are important to ask, and I pose these all the time now. And these are not just for those of you that work directly with students. I think these are good if you run a division or a department that supports educators that work directly with students. How well do I know my students? That's number one. The next one, because it comes up all the time, especially now, how do they define ethics in my classroom? Because I see a lot, especially when it comes to tech and especially artificial intelligence, and it's a whole different talk, but the whole idea around cheating and plagiarism and all those, how do your learners define ethics in your classroom? And what might that conversation look like? And by the way, by engaging that conversation, that also goes back to ownership and agency, okay? How are they using technology? And if they're using artificial intelligence, how are they using it? Are there any good ways that they use technology, including artificial intelligence? How do I know? And then lastly, what role do I play in supporting students? And those are questions to ask in the context of us, but also a larger context, because those are ways in which we can support learners in reaching that goal of true ownership of their learning. And so what does that look like, putting all the pieces together? So Myra, if you don't mind dropping in the chat the link to this. So I have an infographic that I'll just go through here, but I want you all to be able to have this as a reference later. But these are the key components to promoting and supporting higher order thinking in a technology-rich learning environment. And the reason why I wanted you all to have this is, more often than not, when I look at technology, I look at schools or districts or even school systems, even outside the US, where they have high volume tech, more often than not, if their student population tends to be a historically excluded and a marginalized student population, I see high order tech, but low order thinking. What I see is tech is used for intervention. It's used as a reward system. Okay, if you act right, I'll let you go on the computer. And it is used for low order thinking. And what I mean by that are things like the digitization of lessons, automation of multiple choice and true false assessments, purely the submission of assignments and not anything that involves, again, the whole idea around ownership. And so there's the link, and you all have access to it. But the key components are everything that you all heard me mention even before around learner agency. And by the way, I would actually connect a lot of these to many of the words that you all submitted that you saw in that word cloud. Active engagement. How are we supporting learners in actively engaged in their learning using tech? You know, collaboratively, like true collaboration. The first question I always ask when I hear about collaboration, I said, is it synchronous or asynchronous? Is it in person or is it remote? And of course, it's kind of a trick question because it should be all four. Okay. And then I always ask, is that collaboration between student to student, student to teacher, or is it community based? Then connecting on to the next one, you know, what is the problem solving approach? Looking at real problems, like real problems that students can make real life connections to, even if it doesn't impact them right now at their current age. It's something that can say, here's a problem that exists that may impact you directly or indirectly. Here's how it connects to what we're learning. And then, of course, supporting critical thinking, which, if you'll notice, I always say this is the 5 components of a true comprehensive literacy program. They involve reading, writing, speaking, listening, and observing. And even within those 5, one of them we use the most, but is valued the least in education. And then, of course, adaptive learning. Their learning arts are dynamic, not static. Self-directed, that's direct correlation to the ownership you saw. Continuous feedback and assessment. One of the things that I used to do when I taught, and by the way, it wasn't in my first few years. In fact, I will share with you all, just for full transparency, I spent my first 5 years in the classroom unlearning a majority of what I was taught in grad school. And the reason why I say that is that continuous feedback and assessment, one of the things that I started doing that I felt literally made me a far more effective educator is I would do ongoing assessment with the student. How are you feeling about what you're learning? What resources have you not utilized that might help you should you need that help? Are we going at the right pace in order for you to feel that you're going to meet the learning standards or the learning goals that we have? And you'll see I have some more stuff around that. And then all those elements and principles designing and creating a learning culture that supports higher order thinking with technology at its core. So you all have a link to this infographic that you can do reference later. And so the main point around that is I'm going to share with you all some design conditions, and you all will have a don't worry about writing these questions down because I have a document that will be shared with you all that has them. And so what does it look like to design for equity? So this next phase, I'm going to take you all through distinct components, the physical and the environmental, and then the digital, because all of that constitutes our learning environments. And all of these connect to innovation, accelerated learning, and then higher order thinking with technology. So first, let's go to the physical and environmental when it comes to design for equity. What you're looking at here is what I call inequity by design, because this configuration is common and consistent in learning environments. But here's the thing. If you look at this environment and you tell me that you value or class discussions are a part of a learner's assessment or their grade, then I ask, how do you account for those that are in the back of the room? And how do you, by way of doing class participation in only this capacity, you're actually erecting barriers to students that are self-described introverts or maybe reticent to speak up in front of their classmates, but that doesn't mean they don't have something of value to offer to class discussions. And so these are the design questions to consider around that. Does a configuration of the learning environment account for access and opportunity for all? Is it static or dynamic to account for different learning configurations based on the desired learning experience? And of course, what policies or practices need to be in place to support this? I'll give you all a prime example of this, and then I'll move on. Sometimes when I taught, I would literally say to the students, here are our learning goals. Here's how I want you all to collaborate with your classmates. Here are the technology resources that we're going to use. Do we need to change the configuration of this room to be optimized to do that? And it might have been something where if they're doing group work, yes. If they're working with a partner, yes. In some cases, maybe no. But again, the whole idea is to recognize that the physical environment plays just as much of a role in the learning as the pedagogical practice and the resources that we have. When it comes to the digital, again, how are we using tech to support high order thinking? What does it look like to use tech in a meaningful capacity that extends far beyond simply the digitization of lessons? And that goes into things like learner differences are examined, including the planning and design. And then even our usage of time. Time is flexible and dynamic to account for different growth patterns and rates. I used to say to the students, I have a deadline, but I need to know the following. If you were to complete your work by this deadline, are you going to give me the best work at that time? Or are you going to give me your best work possible? And if you need additional time, how much time do you need and what resources are missing that need to be in place in order for you to do that? Recognizing that sometimes the deadlines for projects and things like that need to be dynamic, but it also goes to the whole idea around learner difference or examine included in the planning and design. If I know that you're going to need additional supports, then I'm going to work with you to make sure that those supports are in place before we begin the project. And then we will continue to assess where you're at in regards to your usage of time and your learning. What does it look like when it comes for inclusion? Well, let's start off with the physical environment. Who are the authors of the materials that you are using? Are they people of different identities and backgrounds? I want to share with you all one quick example of this, and that's the following. For time's sake, I'll only share one. So I'll give you all the nexus to what you're seeing here. So after I finished, I graduated from UCLA, and I played sports at UCLA as well. So after I finished attempting to play professional football, I did acting and modeling for a very long time. And so early in my modeling career, my agents had me do a lot of stock photography work. And the whole idea was the stock photography work is how I built my book up before I did a lot of commercial print work. Exactly, Ida, go Bruins. And so the whole idea was I did this. So a lot of the early stock photography work that I did, the photography, the companies were looking at diversifying their database of images and their representations. I'm going to go back because I'm going to show you one, and then I'll tell you the story of this one. So what you're looking at here was a poster that was up on a wall in the Health Career CTE program for a school district I worked with in Georgia. It was up, is near Augusta. And if you'll notice, that poster says, "Can you see yourself here?" And obviously I can answer that question by saying yes. But the reason why I'm sharing this with you all is like, here's an example of how representation makes a difference in our learning environments. And the whole idea around this is that that job was health careers, but not doctors. Okay. So think about what message this poster sends to any child that walks into that classroom that looks like me, and even the children that don't look like me. But I want to share with you all this one because this was also one of the things I did. And you'll notice that that's me. So I don't know if I still am, but I know for a long time I was in the 8th grade science textbook. And the funny thing around this story is that when the kids knew I was in the textbook, eventually when the first group of students figured it out, the next subsequent years, it was interesting how the kids were like, "I can't wait to get the textbook so I can see you in the book." But what's more important is the following, is how often I got comments, and let me go back to this, and then I'll go to this. How often I got comments from students saying, number one, "I've never had a teacher that looks like you." Number two, the big one for me was, I know you're a teacher and this is in a science book, but I've never even seen a scientist that looks like you." And that's the whole idea around that sense of belonging, that sense of possibility, that sense of what I always say is representation matters, because if I don't see it, I don't believe it's possible. And if I don't believe it's possible, I won't pursue it. And if I never pursue it, I can never do it, which means I can never be it. And so that's the whole idea around the physical and the environmental. What are the stories that are being told by the materials that are on the walls, that are in the materials that are used as a part of the instruction? When it comes to the digital and the instructional, this connects to one of my favorite things by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, which I want to share with you all, is a whole concept of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. So here's the quote that she has, which is, "Books are sometimes windows offering views of worlds that be read or imagined familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through an imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror." And what I shared with you all is, even with these, that picture in that textbook served as a mirror for many of the students that look like me. But it also served as a window for all the students that didn't look like me. And then it served as a sliding glass door for those students that said, "I want to do that." And that leads me to the following question for you all to consider is, if you reflect upon your schooling experience, can you identify any instances in which your engagement within the curriculum, whether it be the books that you read or anything else, served as a mirror, window, or even a sliding glass door? And then if you can, what was the instance and how did you feel about it? And watch this. If you have an instance and how did you feel about it, how might that connect to those words that you all shared in that word cloud that we did a short time ago? And how does that connect to learner agency? And so now I want to get into the last design phase, which is for personalization. So when it comes to our physical and environmental, here's a big one for all of us to consider around learner agency. And even in the context of our time together, which is accelerated learning, learner agency, culturally responsive, and all of those things. So again, one of my heroes, Maya Angelou, "Words are things I'm convinced you must be careful about the words you use or the words you allow to be used in your home, in your school, in your social environments, and even in yourself." And the reason why I say that is because when it comes to learners and learner agency, words matter. And so I'm going to share with you all for a moment, because I'm being mindful of my time, how many of these are a type of othering, which is the opposite of inclusion. And now I'll connect that back to joy, engagement, belonging, survival, thrival. And my additional question to you all is, again, going back to, that's the way we've always done it. How many of these are normalized in your vernacular, in your context of your workplace, your workspace, your school, your district, your division, your whole system? These are othering. And so it runs the risk, again, of being the opposite of what we all pointed out and what you all shared around the experience you want learners to have and their sense of belonging. And I'll just point out a couple. I used to have students literally say to me, you know what, Mr. Shelton, I'm at risk. And of course, you heard me mention earlier, well, if it's predictable, then it's also preventable. So I would say to a student, first of all, what are you at risk for? Because if we know it's a risk now, what are the things we can do to mitigate and potentially eliminate that risk? And I would argue that you're at unrealized potential because you know what the risks are, but do we know what the potentials are? Let's focus on that. Asset, not deficit. When I had students that needed to engage in, as you all saw the definition, accelerated learning opportunities. All right, perfect. We need to look at what are the things that we know about you, what are the things that we know you're capable of, and how might we use those to accelerate your learning in the context of this environment? And what does that look like for you to take ownership of it? How do we connect your real lived experience to what we're currently doing in this project, whether it be math, science, any one of the above? And so I share that with you all, and I'm actually going to get this to you all as well, because sometimes it's not a function of our intent, it's a function of what do we have in regards to our resources. And these are words that I associate with an empowering learning culture. Utilizing these in the context of our conversations with our learners, utilizing these in the context of our mission and vision statements, utilizing these as we begin the process of designing our learning environments, utilizing these in ways that support students in understanding and contextualizing them into their own experience and their own learning. And then lastly, I'll share with you all before I go to the last couple of things is these are some of the additional conditions to consider around designing for personalization. Multi-option assignment and assessment models are used often. Proficiency is defined and assessed in large measure by learner growth from a background knowledge starting point. One of the most powerful questions that we can ask our learners, especially when it comes to accelerated learning, here's what we're going to learn, here's the goals. I want you to take a moment and think about if these are the goals, how does that fit into your understanding of your lived experience now or the dreams you have of yourself later? I guess one of the most powerful things, because that supports that one there at the bottom. Learners are supported in making real life connections to the content. And then the personalization when it comes to the digital, again, balancing out individual needs and community wellness and community growth, using technology to do that. And which also requires us to think about things differently. And you know what that is? We must begin the process of incorporating artificial intelligence into our learning environments. We have to do it from a perspective of all of the following. Again, I'll go back to if it's predictable, it's also preventable. Artificial intelligence runs the risks of exacerbating and automating the inequities and the exclusionary practices that have been historically in place. But it also provides a promise to dismantle those and provide our learners and us with opportunities to innovatively look at our learning environments, our pedagogical approach. And I'd also say I would encourage you all, and this is a whole nother talk that I could have done, but I would encourage you all to do all of the following. How might a responsible and effective and ethical use of artificial intelligence support any initiatives or practices you have around accelerated learning? What does it look like to use it in a practical and responsible capacity? Not an oversimplification using the top 10 list things, none of that. I always say artificial intelligence should be embedded into any sort of comprehensive digital literacy, digital fluency, acute language skills, and technology acumen approach to learning. Our learners are using tech, so how might we support them in using it in a meaningful capacity that is responsive to their needs and supports their growth? And if we're able to connect those design conditions with that learning experience you all share, utilizing tech at the core of what we're doing to support higher order thinking, those are the ways in which the accelerated learning can not only take place, but it can be responsive, it can be practical, and it can support everything you all share. Joy, engagement, wellness. And guess what all those things connect to? Learners taking ownership of their learning. And if we do that from a comprehensive approach, meaning we support our needs, we support our learners' needs, we support ourselves physically, cognitively, and emotionally, and spiritually. We do all of those things. That lends itself to creating environments that are joyful, that are engaging, that we take ownership, our learners take ownership, and we accelerate learning from a community-based approach. And so my hope for you all is that in the context of this will be a catalyst for you to think in terms of innovation and accelerated learning. And here's how I'm going to leave you all with a quote again from one of my heroes, is the whole idea around giving yourselves the grace and space to learn and grow together, especially in the context of our summit, but even far beyond this. You do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, you do better. So I know I finished a little bit early, surprisingly. Normally, I'm not a good gauge of my time. So I will share with you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this summit. And of course, I have to send a personal thank you to my friends with the county office, because it always brings me joy to be able to do things with you all. And many of the county office folks know why I love the opportunity to be able to do work in thought partnership with you all, especially because of the connection that we have with my late father. So I know we finished a couple of minutes early. I would say if it would maybe, Barb, if anyone has any couple of questions, but if you all don't have questions now, don't worry about it, because you're going to need time to process, which is precisely why you're going to have access to some of the things that I just shared as well in a document.